Hi, Simon.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Just been one of those days. I'm in a
Yeah.
closet. How are you? I gotta ask
Hanging
you
in
before
there.
anybody gets on, how did you get Sock's nickname? Where did that come from?
Oh, it comes from a television show called How I Met Your Mother. Have you ever
Yes,
seen that show?
I haven't seen it, but I know of it.
So there are these characters who are friends, and there's there's like five of them, five main characters, and
Is
um
Ashton Kutcher, is that the one he's in?
no, he's not in that one.
Okay.
But they're having this conversation about whether or not they should have this one married couple is trying to decide whether they should have a baby or not. And one of their friends is very pro baby and one is very anti baby or anti kids. And so the one character goes to the friend's house and is sitting on her couch talking to her about it. And she reaches between the cushions and pulls out a little baby sock. And her friend says, "Oh, that's from my nephew who was here, this last week or whatever." And she's like, "Oh, sock." And every time they say something anti-baby, they'd be like, "But sock." And so we had been thinking about, did we want to have a kid or not? And so we started referring to a potential baby as sock.
Hmm.
And then it just kind of went from there.
Oh my gosh, that's a great story.
Yeah.
And do his friends call him Sock?
Yeah. Yeah. If you ask him what his name is, people ask him what his name is, he says, "My name is Gabriel, but I prefer to be called Saki," because that's what Chantal calls him.
Okay. I love that. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Someone's calling me. Hello, this is Laura.
Hi, Simon. How are you doing?
I'm well, Kathy. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Got some new professional lighting and a upgraded camera. So
You're all set.
hope I look even better than usual.
Well, you do. I brought my laptop, so hopefully I'm not freezing like I was with my phone.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's crazy. I look at some people like, especially movie stars, they get on their Zoom and they look so good and they have no wrinkles. I'm like, how does that? I mean, maybe they just are beautiful anyway, but I'm like, look at this lighting. I mean, I'm in a closet right now because I couldn't find any place to go. It's not very good.
And I was trying to close my shades because it was so bright in here.
Well, and then I was like, I was in the middle. I actually have to probably send an email. I'm supposed to do a reference call. I got another one that I'd called and then they called me back. So I'm just like crazily trying to do stuff. This is my like worst day, probably. No, Thursday.
I'm gonna shut my other shade here 1 second. See if that helps the light. Oops.
Well, I sent one to Joe, so he should be in this meeting, and I can't remember who else. Julie, maybe?
Grab my headphones so I don't broadcast this all over the office.
I wasn't sure if you had a chance to send it to Joe, so I sent it to him too. So hopefully that didn't confuse things.
So I have this list of
Hi, Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Good.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to I'm supposed to be in 2 meetings right now, so I'm sending an email to let them know that I'm doing this. Okay. I'm sorry.
Adam, are you back in session at school?
Tomorrow's our first day back.
I don't even know what the schedule is here. Is the college back in? Do you know? Kathy? I don't know.
No, they're not, because Kenna's coach comes back the week of the 15th, she said, for school. So they must start next week.
Yeah. It's kind of odd to start on a Wednesday. We started on a Wednesday in the fall semester, and here we are starting on a Wednesday again, but it's very strange. It kind of throws everything off, you know?
And kind of warm into your week. It's a little
Yeah.
warm up.
Yeah, I guess. I'd rather just do a full week. But
Mhm.
We are waiting for one other person, I believe, and that's Joe Martinez. And Joe, and should be joining us very soon. But he's gonna listen to the interview. I don't think he's gonna participate, right?
That's what he said, yeah.
So do you guys want me to go first? So welcome, Adam. Welcome back. Nice to see you. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted. I work in a school also, and I'm in a closet right now. Someone might come in. It's hard to find a place to go. So I'm in here. We are just really excited we're starting our second round of interviews. You're our second round person. This is our job to kind of get to our group of finalists. And then with that group of finalists, we'll invite them to come in to Missoula here and really meet some of the rest of the staff and the board and other people. So again, we've got a list of questions. We're hoping these are like performance-based questions. So we want to get specific examples of what you've done. And we probably will take a little longer than we did in the first interview. And then we definitely have time for you to ask your questions at the end. So I'll start with the first one. And it's, aside from financial goals or financial data, how do you set goals? How do you measure success and recognize achievements?
well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm just so delighted to be in a second round. Haven't met you, Simon. May I call you Simon? Nice to meet you, Simon. And hello, Jonna, as well. Nice to see you. As far as goals are concerned, they've always kind of been, I guess it really kind of, the idea of goal setting really for me started when I was a late teenager, thinking about setting attainable goals. And so that was something that my cross-country coach in high school used to talk about. He used to say, Adam, let's, because I used to want to always win races and I never did. But he said, Adam, let's set attainable goals. Meaning that, I was a part of a larger team, and our team was very successful as a high school cross-country student. And so I was always the number 3 man as a high school student. And so he would always kind of side coach me during races, and he would say, Adam, you need to get 6 up. The 6th man ahead of you is where you need to go. Because we were obviously talking about the greater good and the greater team effort. And so really, some of those experiences have always really shaped, that's one example of probably many, shaping how I go about personally setting goals for myself, always, dreaming about what's possible. I never thought in a million years when I graduated as an undergraduate student in the early 2000s that I would eventually write a dissertation and pretty much do it all by myself. And, that's an arduous process for sure, but never in a million years did I ever think that coming out of undergraduate school that I'd want to be a glutton for punishment and further education. and go through that process, but I learned to love it. So as you know, I think about my own individual desires, about where I want to be and how I want to grow in many areas of my life, not just, you know, from a business professional, a teacher, growing in that capacity, growing as a husband, as a friend. And so I think about, you know, developing myself and furthering myself to really be the best that I can be. And I think a lot of that honestly stems from some of the teachings that I had as a kid when I was at PAC. You know, I never really, when I was attending performing arts camp as a kid, I never really knew what was possible. And that's one of the things that Missoula Children's Theater, I think, does so beautifully, is that they see potential, they recognize potential, and they challenge you to grow. Almost in an ambiguous way, you know, it's never like, how are you going to be better? But, you know, it's all of these little nuggets of information along the way that have kind of inspired me. As far as measuring success, you know, I tell my students here at university all the time, and when I taught public school as well, you know, all I ask is that you give your very best. And if you give your very best, and I give my very best, and we meet in the middle, that's all really anybody can ask for. So I guess that's how I kind of approximate success. You know, I'm a lifelong learner. It's something I've always been. I think it's innate in me. My parents were both teachers, and so I've always wanted to learn and grow. In fact, when I throughout this process, really in the last 6 weeks, you know, leadership in this type of capacity is somewhat foreign. I think a lot of transfers are easily made from the university setting into you know, an executive position in this manner. But I've read 7 books, I think, in the last 6 weeks. I had a nice winter break to help with all of that, but all of them focused on nonprofit leadership or something that could directly transfer in, you know, who are the gurus in this and what do they say, and listen to some podcasts and really kind of reflected on how I can grow in that way. So this has been a fun process for me, you know, to continually learn and grow. And as a lifelong learner, I think that's one way that I also measure success. I think when we become stagnant in our growth, that's when things can be problematic. And so I'm always wanting to get better. I'm always wanting to go outside of my comfort zone. You know, there's an old quote that if you're uncomfortable, it means you're growing, it means you're doing something right, something along those lines. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of where I stand.
And then the last part of it was, how do you recognize achievements? Just a quick one on that.
Oh, well, I think, you know, I'm a big believer in uplifting others. And I think when somebody else does well, I find great success in that. You know, I'm not really one for personal accolades. My wife tells me I need to be better about it. You know, this last fall, I was awarded an outstanding outstanding alumni. I got to get my words correctly, from my alma mater, and it's that plaque right there above my wall. And you know, she's like, Adam, you should be celebrating this morning. I'm like, well, I feel like an imposter in some ways. And so I've always kind of thought about it as, you know, when other people are thriving and you know, from an educational standpoint, when my students find success, that means I think I find success and achievement. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Kathy, why don't you ask the second question? Sorry.
Sorry about that. I had to turn the page. So Adam, when you're faced with a decision in your work environment, what is your style for gathering information from various sources, making the decision, and then disseminating the decision to all parties involved or that have a stake in the decision.
I think I might have to have you repeat some of the question later, but so I guess it's part of my training through graduate school, but I'm a research-based guy. I'm a quantitative guy as far as numbers are concerned. I really kind of geek out with data. You know, what did the data say? That's kind of always my first question when it comes to best practices of education and all things music. I always ask the question, well, what do the data say? If it's unfamiliar territory, that's always the first place that I start, is just trying to gather as much concrete evidence-based data. And then also looking at anecdotal things as well, anecdotal evidence as well, which I think is also important. You know, there's in my field, for example, music education really is kind of almost in its infancy still. You know, if you think about things through a lens of time, we've only been really studying how musicians learn and how they process information and teaching feedback really since like the late 60s, early 70s. And so, you know, when you think about that through the scope of time, we're really in a lot of ways very much in our infancy. And so sometimes we rely on anecdotal evidence to support our cases. And what I mean by that is, you know, there are certainly studies to support with respect to education. What are best practices for delivering feedback, for example, or what are best practices for, you know, X, Y, and Z. And some of the things we know to be true simply because, you know, that's the way it's been done for a long time. And we can see, you know, we can listen to others and we can take tips in communication with one another and kind of approximate and try something, and we find out that it works, although it might not have empirical data to support, you know, such a case. So really the first place that I start in any kind of process with decision making is just trying to gather up as much information as possible, whether that's research-based or conversations with a colleague or other colleagues across the country or in the same state. And then, you know, really kind of sorting through all of it. That's usually step two. Step two is I tend to live my life in a very kind of pragmatic way, I think, that I don't necessarily get charged one way or the other. I try to live in this kind of neutral zone and be very methodical in my approach, and just make sure that I have all of the information ahead of me before I can make a proper decision. And I do that with, I suppose, on a much, you know, on a personal level. One of the things that I think it drives my wife crazy, but through repeated measures, I've learned to love cooking. And when the start of the pandemic happened, we couldn't find any bread. And so I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to try to make bread. Let me just make some bread. And so I started a sourdough culture, and I've learned to kind of love making sourdough bread. And as with most things in my life, I tend to do things on a repeated basis to try and make sure that, you know, like with scrambled eggs or bread making, same recipe, tweak it until I've got it right, and then move on. So that's kind of an aside, but you know, looking at all of the information and then digesting it. I'm usually not one to jump to conclusions right away. I'm the type of person that likes to sit on information for a little bit, talk with people. What, you know, are you seeing this the same way I'm seeing this? What do you think about this? And then reflect. That's usually my process. Reflecting quite a bit and thinking about the pros and cons of said action. If I do this, what could be the effects? If I don't do this, what could be the effects? And, you know, trying to look as objective as possible with all of the information presented before before moving forward. And, you know, we're kind of living in that right now in the education sector, especially with this new variant coming around with COVID. You know,
Mhm.
things are changing all the time. In fact, we got an email this morning. I had a retreat this last weekend, and of course, 6 of my kids that were at retreat are now in quarantine. And so that's like, uh, but you know, that's the nature of what it is. And so I've been thinking about, could have I done something differently? You know, did I plan as much as I could ahead of time to ensure the safety and well-being of others, et cetera. And so I guess step 1 in the process, gathering the information. Step 2 is really kind of reflecting, digesting all of it, and then making a final decision about things. And Kathy, would you mind repeating the last portion of your question?
Yeah, and it's I guess the question is more like your decision style and how you disseminate it. So I guess in that regard, keep in mind, you know, there's a large staff here, and oftentimes
Sure.
there's competing interests, and so you're going to be gathering information from various departments.
Sure.
What's your preferred style for making that decision and letting everybody know involved? Is it like a group setting? Do you like to talk to people individually to to discuss a decision, or what's your approach?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, here at the university level, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I you know, my students are stakeholders here, and so I ask what they think. I ask my chair in my department. I ask my dean. On rare occasions, I will go beyond that to my provost. But I like to make decisions collectively, but I also like to make things independently. I mean, you know, some decisions can be made independently without a whole lot of consultation. Some decisions need to be made as a group, especially when it impacts the greater good. And so, you know, I think the short answer to your question is that it just depends on the situation. I think it's very much situational, but I definitely rely on the counsel of others to make the best decision, especially if I'm not the expert. You know,
Right.
if somebody else is an expert in the field, I'm going to rely on their advice. They're clearly the expert. And as much as I'd love to say that we can be knowledgeable about everything, it's next to impossible. So,
Okay. Thank you.
sure.
We didn't preset an order for asking questions, but John, if you don't mind, maybe I'll jump in. Adam, it's nice to meet you. My name is Simon, and I've been volunteering with MCT for over 20 years, and I'm on the board now, so here in that capacity. Our third question here, as I look at it, I think I'm going to ask you this question, but I think you've already answered a lot of it in your first 2 answers, so don't feel like you need to repeat yourself. I've heard what you've already said, but there might be some nuance of difference here, so I'm going to give it to you. Specifically different, I think we're looking at or asking you to think about day-to-day operations, and I think we want you to talk to us about 4 things. Tell us your approach to leading a new project. Talk to us about how you select your team. Third is, how do you define the scope and set milestones? And then how do you measure success? And if you can talk to us about that with specific examples, I think that would help us.
Well, pleasure to meet you, Simon. And thanks for all of your service to MCT. 20 years is a long time.
That is.
Sure. So as far as day-to-day operations are concerned, I kind of heard 4 pinpoints there, but you know, I heard 2 questions in there. And the first one is, as far as running day-to-day operations, I'm a very regimented, very routine-based individual. I'm always in the office by this certain time, and I make sure that I devote this amount of time. One thing I learned through grad school is learning to, there's lots of irons in the fire when you're in grad school. And I think that's the it of being a teaching assistant while trying to write a dissertation, et cetera. It's, you know, learning to allocate this amount of time for this project, and then being able to be okay that it's not going to be perfect by the end of, say, 2 hours time or 45 minutes time, getting from point A to point B. And part of that is learning, I think, to trust the process. And so with respect to individual projects, as far as leading new ideas, of course, I tend to be a dreamer and think about, what is possible. With respect to an example of that, in my last two, well, my current institution at Northwest Missouri State and my previous institution at University of Central Missouri, I've served on kind of task force for music education redesign. In the first setting at University of Central Missouri, it was about trying to whittle down the number of hours that we are having students in our music education program in their sequence. And I think I mentioned this last time in the first interview, but as a music education major, you are really kind of doing a dual degree. You're doing a music degree plus an education degree. And as you can imagine, that's a lot different than, say, a business degree where you might only have 120 credits. Music ed students often have, it's not uncommon for them to walk out of here with 140 some plus credit hours. And so the overall goal at Central and here is kind of a secondary thought, is to whittle down those hours so that students can get in, get out, and start their jobs, start their careers as efficiently as possible. Along with that, we're also kind of looking at what are the contemporary trends in music education and trying to use all of the information that we have to, all of the national dialogue surrounding any number of events, whether it's social injustice or there are lots of contemporary topics in music education, but thinking about where we want to be, say, with strategic planning, where do we want Northwest to be in 20 years? What do we want our students to walk away with? And how can we pioneer that? How can we be, blazing the trail, so to speak? And so we've been talking a lot about what's necessary, what's not necessary. Is this an antiquated practice? Would this benefit others in some way? As an aside, I was doing some digging on the website, your website, a little bit earlier, and I didn't know this existed, but I was really delighted to see it, an intergenerational tour residency. And I think that's just absolutely fantastic, because there's a lot of cutting edge research on that with respect to music. And so it was kind of it was a welcome surprise as I was reading online. And so, taking some of those things into consideration, and that's one of the things that I've been talking about with my colleagues here is, what if we got rid of this ensemble and instead, what if we did an intergenerational choir? And so that kind of everybody's eyes perked up, and that could be something that's really different and sets us apart from our peer institutions. And so, as far as leading those projects, leading any project, I think it's about trusting one another. It's about trusting the right people to be honest with you, open and honest with you, and say, no, that's a terrible idea, of which I've been told many times. I've also been told conversely that, oh yeah, that's a great idea. We need to go through with that. That 100%, yes. What do we do to make that happen? And so, when selecting different activities or leading different projects, it's really kind of starts with the idea and seeing if it's even possible. And then I think the step 2 part of your question is, how do we select the right team? And I think the passion has to be there. So, does so-and-so even want to contribute to this project, or is this going to be a waste of time and like pulling teeth, because I really deeply believe that people that want to be involved with projects will put their best foot forward and make sure that the project is seen through. So I think there has to be an interest there and passion. Of course, you can also recruit as well, because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. You know, I need so-and-so's brain to handle X, Y, and Z, and I need so-and-so to look at this through a different lens because I'm going to be completely biased with this side of things, if that makes sense. And so I think it's relying on others. And I think also, you know, as a leader, I think that's one of my strengths, is being sometimes able to see. I've learned as a teacher to see things in students that often they don't see within themselves. And I think that's one of my strengths as a leader, to say, no, I think you would be wonderful. And of course, not through any kind of manipulation tactics, but planting the seed to say, I think you'd be really great. I think you'd be really great with this project. And can you help us out? And so I think it, you know, with respect to building a team, I think it boils down to interest and then recruitment as well. And I think that's part of the job of any leader, is to see potential and know what are the vital components, you know, of said project, and then being able to move on to the next step which is setting milestones. As far as milestones are concerned, you know, just like anything else, it's providing checkpoints. You know, by this date, I think we need to have this, and this in place. I think that's one of my strengths as a teacher. I've had to learn this, you know, day one of score study, you know, with a music score, is being able to look at everything in front of you and create what we call an aural image. In other words, the sound that's in your mind. So if you were to just stare at the score, do you have music playing in your brain? And that's something that we train our pre-service teachers to do, you know, to start to listen and hear things and recognize what could be the roadblocks. In other words, pedagogically speaking, what could be problematic. But, you know, trying to look at the whole and understand what is that aural image. And I have an equation that I talk to my students about. It's fantasy performance minus actual performance equals what you have to teach. In other words, the sound that you have going on in your head versus what you're hearing in real time with your ensembles is where you have to fill in the gaps. And through all of that, I think, you know, through years and years of score study and years of looking at different projects, research projects, et cetera, it's kind of about taking all of the information and then dissecting it to know and putting it in order. You know, what's the best path, or what's the most efficient way to get from point A to point B, and what needs to happen in order for me to do that. Another example would be writing a dissertation. You know, it's a very kind of formulaic process if you are aware with it. You know, by the summer before you intend to graduate in a year's time, you need to have your portfolio of projects, which one of which will become a dissertation. And by first step in the process is a review of literature, and then you do your methodology, and then you go through an IRB process, which is Institutional Review Board, et cetera. So it's just about kind of dissecting the whole to figure out what needs to happen in sequential order. And then, you know, as far as measuring success is concerned, sometimes we make decisions and they're great decisions and the outcome is wonderful. And sometimes they're a flop. We've all been there, you know. Something that might be a wonderful idea on paper and a shared belief among many might turn out to be a total bust. And I think it's okay to say, you know what, we at least tried and we executed the plan as best we could. We thought we were doing right. We had as much information as possible, but it just, you know, it didn't turn out. And then sometimes things that we think aren't going to be wonderful successes gain really great traction and prove to be very, very successful. So I think the the best answer to the fourth bullet point would simply be just making a decision and moving forward. And you make the decision that you're making the right one. And I know that sounds kind of strange to say out loud, but the decision you make is the right one, you know? And that sounds, I don't know how it sounds. When it's said out loud, it kind of sounds funny. But, you know, when I think about, I was talking to my father not long ago about different things, and we were talking about, I was kind of at a crossroads. I don't remember what it was in particular, but he said something, he said that out loud, and it was kind of profound to me at the time. And he said, Adam, the decision you make the decision you make the right one. I thought, well, that's strange. But I guess, yeah, if I made the decision, it's going to be the right one. And we might find out later that it was a terrible decision, but we convince ourselves that it's going to be the right one. And so, yeah, as far as measuring success, that's how I would go about doing it. And if people feel gratified, then I think then we've done our job. You know, if somebody has been impacted for the better, then I think we've done our job.
Super, thanks. Adam, it's great to see you.
Likewise.
I'd love to give you more backstory on the intergenerational program, and I will do that at some point because it's pretty magical. It's on pause right now, of course, but there's some really pretty incredible stories with regard to music and how it uses a different part of the brain for our seniors. Well, for anybody, but our seniors being accompanists, they are in the memory center and can accompany the program. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not going to take any more time on that because we have 4 more questions for you, not including your questions to us. So next question is about crisis management. As you know, MCT is generally quite vulnerable as a company. We work with children, we have young people on the road driving millions of miles a day. So what is your experience with crisis management aside from COVID? Tell us about a crisis you've either managed or been involved with resolving.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to see you too, Jonna. And not to go into great detail, but my grandmother-in-law, she's now since passed, but the music and research is just such a fascinating thing. She lost her, she had dementia and she couldn't recognize her children towards the end of her life. But every Christmas we would go and pull out the hymn book and she could sing every Christmas carol in the book from memory, multiple verses. I think that's just absolutely fascinating. So hopefully COVID will move on very quickly and we can get back to doing things that impact people for the positive. With respect to crisis management, you know, as an educator, I think really quality educators always think about the worst possible outcome. And they reflect and say, you know, with any situation, you know, whether it's planning a trip abroad or planning a trip locally or, you know, taking kids to contest or something, you know, musically speaking. The first question that always comes back to me that I always do in reflection is, what could have I done differently? Because I really think that great teachers, great educators are able to kind of look at everything and make a plan for everything and think about things in the worst possible way. In other words, you know, what could be the outcome of this and am I prepared for it? If this is going to, if we do this, what could potentially happen? What are the hiccups? And be prepared for it, you know? And I tell my students who are pre-service teachers to visualize their classroom and try to control as many of those variables as possible. And I think what you're asking here is no different. I think it's all about looking at the big picture and trying to see and control as many of those variables as possible. I know it sounds redundant, but it's important to say over and over again, because we have to think. I think it's so important that we think about every angle and what could go wrong might very well, and do we have a plan for it? So I have two in recent mind. And I think probably I think I told the one when I took my group overseas to China a couple years ago. That was a disaster, an absolute disaster. I wanted it to be a really wonderful situation, but it just wasn't. So I'll tell another story from when I was teaching in public school. I thought it would be a really great idea. It was, not thought, it was a great idea. We're going to take the kids to Winter Park, Colorado. I was teaching in Texas at the time, and I thought, these kids have never seen snow. There's a great music festival up there. We're gonna take kids to Winter Park, Colorado, many of whom have never seen snow, and we're gonna sing in this festival, and then we're gonna enjoy some time on the mountain. Seemed like a good idea at the time. So we did all of the planning, you know, to work through, you know, all of the parental forms, all of the understanding that, like, you could ski down a mountain, you could get injured, here's what's going to happen. And so I'll kind of give you the thorns in the mix. So we left at, I'll give you a fast version. We left at like 5 p.m. rush hour. Didn't think about that being an issue in Dallas, Fort Worth. We left at rush hour. We were supposed to be there. We were going to drive 12 hours through the night. We ended up not leaving the Metroplex for 2 hours behind schedule. So we were already off to a great start. I say that with an extreme level of sarcasm. And we get on the road, and I think all is well. We're like in West Texas up by Armadillo. I don't know. We were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Tumbleweeds are really the only thing you can see through the dark headlight, the dark nighttime and the headlights. And so I'm basically asleep. It's like 11 o'clock in the night, and I'm basically asleep because the bus had started to calm down. And all of a sudden I get a tap on my shoulder, and the tap is, Mr. Zurst, I think Bonnie's having a seizure. And I was thinking, what? And so I, of course, like, I'm awake. And so I go back to the back of the bus, and sure enough, I go back and this child is convulsing, major convulsions. I'd experienced a seizure at one, not myself personally, but I had witnessed a grand mal seizure earlier in my teaching career. And every sign was indicating that that's what it was. So I quickly went back up to the front of the bus to my assistant principal who was with me at the time. And I said, what do we do? And so she thankfully had a doctor friend, and doctor said, do these tests. And bottom line is you need to get her to a hospital as quickly as possible. So we did these tests. She was unresponsive, pulled over to the side of the road. We're now like 4 hours away from Dallas, Fort Worth, and had to get Dad on the phone. Dad comes up in the middle of the night. I didn't want the students on the bus. I had 2 administrators with me at the time. I didn't want the bus to be late. So we went forward with the trip. I sent them on, and I stayed back with the child because Dad was en route from Dallas, Fort Worth with the hospital staff, etc. The doctor, in a very diplomatic way, the long and the short of it is, with this particular child, she had faked a seizure. Yikes. And so Dad had to take her home. And I was wrecked. It was like 4 a.m. in the night. I'm still trying to keep a positive attitude, but you know, the dad was like, I had to get to back to Wichita to catch a flight to Denver. While all of this is happening, I'm like texting the bus to see where they are and making plans to go forward with the trip, whilst, you know, sending child home. Dad comes. Dad is so tired, he makes me drive in the middle of the night. Awesome. So we drive back to Wichita. I catch a flight. I make it with minutes to spare. I fly to Denver. I take a $90 taxi ride from the airport in Denver, which is clear on the outskirts of town, to the other end of Denver. And I end up on the side of the road. I just had the taxi driver drop me off at a random stop sign outside the interstate, and timed it perfectly. 15 minutes later, I'm back on the bus and we're on our way to Winter Park. Well, then a child breaks his leg on the trip, which was great. So all of these are like little moments of crisis, right? Like panic. What's the worst that could happen? And it did. I had a child fall asleep on stage trying to give the performance. So that was fun. Nice adjudication remarks. Is your tenor sleeping? Question mark. Yes, the tenor was sleeping. Absolutely. So anyway, the long and the short of it is that, you know, I've dealt with those situations before. It ended up being a very positive trip for all parties involved, even despite the hiccups with health and safety. But I think one of the most important things was communication the whole time, just making sure that I am trusting the people that were on the trip with me to execute accordingly while I stayed back, making sure that I did have a plan in case this were to happen. And of course, I had kind of thought about all of these things, probably not on that grand of a scale, but you know, that's part of being like in my blood as a leader, is to just, you know, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And I think that's what we do as leaders. And it's certainly something that I do, is, you know, hope for the best possible outcome. And if it's not the case, what are the variables that are going to get in the way of that? But through the whole process, I think communication is important, particularly proactive communication. I think reactive communication can be very problematic, if not detrimental, depending on the circumstance. And so I think, you know, I think it's, you know, like I said, very important to be proactive about things, and of course, gathering all the information as necessary, but to be really thoughtful and intentional about how you're going to react to certain situations. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Thank you, Adam. I'm just gonna give us a time reminder. It's 3:12, and to be honest, I have got to lead a meeting that I didn't know about at 3:45. So the next, we have, like Jonna said, we have a series of 9, and to make sure that you have time, let's just try and make sure we get through all of them. This one, you know, MCT, as you know, is both the touring children's theater and then the community theater. Locally, we're known for both the tour and the community theater, but internationally, we're most known for the tour. How do you see yourself devoting your time and energy between the two, knowing that they aren't equal monetarily, but are both very important to the mission of this organization, and sometimes have competing interests? And that's the first part of the question. So how would you devote your time and energy between the two? And then how do you propose bringing more awareness of our tour to the Missoula community?
Sure. Well, the first, I'll try to not be so long-winded. I'll try to be not even close. So the first question I would have with respect to your first question is, or the first part of the question is, do both have separate IRS designations? Are they separate 501c? They're together.
No, they're together.
Yeah, so that would be the
MCT
first
Inc.
question.
Yeah.
You know, theoretically, they, you know, maybe should be separate, but that's neither here nor there. But as far as time management is concerned, I think it's about keeping the main thing, and obviously both are important, and I think they both serve different purposes. I think it's Stephen Covey, that's not my phrase, but Stephen Covey talks about keeping the main thing, and I think that's really important. and I think as long as I think you have to be really careful about how you allocate resources. Of course, I would need to look at a budget to really fully answer this question better than I'm probably going to answer it right now. But, you know, looking at financials to know if we would be properly, if in other words, if this is impeding on this and vice versa, and is one going to get in the way of the mission and the overall goal. And I guess it's really kind of looking at each of the different programs that are very important to the company. You know, I think about I was thinking about food the other day, and I was thinking about like a Brussels sprout pod or whatever you want to call it, you know. And
Stock.
A what?
A stock.
A stock.
Brus-
That's the word. What a yeah, a one syllable word that'll just trip you up. But a Brussels sprout stalk. Yeah, thank you, Jonna. But I was thinking about, you know, the lifeline, you know, being the home, with respect to MCT, the lifeline being, you know, the stem, and then all of the different sprouts themselves that are very important. And so I think it would be important to look at, you know, at the stalk to make sure that, you know, are there some that are healthier than others, to some of the sprouts that are healthier than others, some that, you know, are maybe stealing the lifeblood a little bit. So I think it's about keeping the main thing. And as far as allocating time, I think it's, I think it's just, that's really my, without looking at a bunch of data, that's my, that'd be my response, is just, you know, are these programs reaching the mission and are in line with the mission, the North Star, so to speak. And if that's the case, then I think it's just about being equitable and making sure that, you know, devoting as much time as necessary to each to make sure that they can thrive. And what was the second part of your question, Laura?
The second part was, and actually Jonna should be asking this one, how would you propose bringing more awareness of the tour to the Missoula community?
Yeah, I think that's to me, that's a question of intention versus function. You know, my perception is that people are, I would think they'd be aware of the children's theater within the community, and that's something that we do. Or that you know, that's how the children's theater was founded. And I would think that'd be something that the community would be keenly aware of. But, you know, intention versus function, sometimes perception doesn't often match reality. And so tackling that, I would just try and make sure that the answering those questions somehow, does our perception match our reality? What is MCT in the community, to the community? Is it the same as it is regionally or nationally or internationally? My perception, granted, I don't live in Missoula, is that it is, but if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm kind of reading between the lines that it might not always be the case. And so I think I think that would be an interesting problem to try and figure out. You know, try to figure out different marketing strategies to make people more aware, or fundraising strategies to bring an awareness about that. So again, it's hard for me to answer really with 100% certainty, but to try and figure out why is that the case, intention versus function, and making sure that perception matches the reality. But looking at data to say what has worked, what has not worked, and how can we go about making this change. And the last thing I'll say about that is, you know, one of the questions that you asked me last time was about vision for the company, and that would be one of the things that I would hope as an executive director, in the executive director role, would be to bring more visibility, not only at the local level, but at the national and international level. You know, when I think about, when you ask the question about, you know, if I said fast food hamburger chain, I would suspect that many of you would probably say McDonald's. If I said kids theme park, many of you might say Disney World. If I said global athletic brand, you'd probably say Nike, etc. Electric car, Tesla, and the list goes on and on. And my hope would be that when you say children's theater, people immediately say Missoula Children's Theater. You know, and I know there are other children's theaters across the country that are thriving as well, but I don't know that anybody does what MCT does, or does it as effectively and reaches as many students across the globe. And so that would be one of the things that I would want to target, to think about how do we increase visibility, not only in the community, but on a national and international stage as well. That, you know, when you think of the transfer, but when you think of a zoo, right, you think of one of the first ones that comes to my mind, even though I've never been there, I've just heard its reputation precedes itself, is San Diego Zoo, right? Everybody knows about the San Diego Zoo. Although I've never been there, I have a desire to go at some point. But anyway, I would like, you know, children's theater to become, without question, synonymous with Missoula Children's Theater. So.
Okay, on to the next question here, Adam. Kind of switching gears a little bit, but how would you foster or support professional development for staff at every level in the organization, to include yourself as the executive director?
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because that was actually one of my questions, which is, do you promote or support professional development? As a lifelong learner, the short answer to the question is, as a lifelong learner, I'm in full support of it. Because I think it's so important for us to continue to grow as people, and to think about things perhaps in a different way. I mean, there are marketing techniques that are cutting edge, and there are probably different financial strategies and ways to go about doing things that maybe are new and exciting, and perhaps easier and more efficient. And so I am in full support. I would be in full support of such an endeavor, both for staff and for myself. In fact, that would kind of be a hidden expectation for someone in my position, you know, perhaps taking a leap from higher education into an executive director role, to figure out a way to, you know, make sure that I have counsel. Because I think when you boil it all down, I think you know, it's a sign of strength, not weakness, that you're asking for help and you're asking for growth. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, here at the university level, I attend probably 3 or 4 conferences every single year, all of which challenge me in the many facets of my role as an educator. You know, I attend research conferences to become a better researcher. I attend conducting conferences to become a better conductor. And I attend teaching conferences to become a better teacher. And I sit in on multiple sessions. I offer professional development at these conferences as well. And so I think it's such an important part of growth. And I think it would be, I think it's critical for the success and health of an organization to continue to grow and move forward.
Thank you.
Would you share how you would build rapport and trust with your new staff if you were the executive director here?
Sure. I think one of the first things that I would do, Simon, is probably a transfer from something I do when I go out and adjudicate ensembles, whether that's state level or national level. I picked up something when I was adjudicating in Florida a few years back called the the 3 C's, the rule of the 3 C's. Compliment, excuse me, that's not the order. Critique, compliment. No, that was the order. Compliment, critique, and course of action. In other words, I think a very easily transferable concept to an executive director role would be to sit down with individuals. That would be one of the first goals, in the first 30 days, first week, perhaps. Sit down with everybody, or just send out a survey and be prepared to sit down and answer these questions. What is something that we as an organization do very well? Compliment. What's something that we don't do very well? But along with that, if you're going to criticize, there has to be some kind of course of action for that, not just complaining to complain. I tell my students, you're not allowed to complain. Just, that's not what we do as educators, just get in and get the job done. But if you do have a criticism, what would you propose is the course of action to rectify that? And then probably as an addendum to that statement would be, is there anybody with whom you'd like to work on said project? If it was something that was voiced by multiple stakeholders, then I would probably, might be something that needs to be addressed. And so I think that's probably one of the easiest ways to build trust, is to just listen. So I would say it's probably twofold. That would be one, is just listening to make sure that people understand that they have a voice, their voice is heard, and it doesn't just go unnoticed. And the second thing is, well, I guess 3, now that I'm thinking about it. I would suppose the second thing is empowering individuals. I am a big believer in creating a tolerance for ambiguity. In other words, sometimes it's important not to be so black and white, because I think so often people want answers that are black and white, and we live in a gray area. We live in a gray world where the answers aren't always black and white. And sometimes we have to trust our instincts and trust our colleagues and trust the people who are in those certain positions to make the best informed decision at the time. And I think it's important that I think there's a fine balance with the things that would potentially be coming across my desk to say, I think that's really great. Have you considered? But to always think about empowering individuals as best as I know how, which I've always found that one of the best ways to do that is to reinforce through positivity, that even negative feedback can be delivered in a positive way. And the third thing I would say is that this is something that I've always prided myself on, and I know, well, I've always prided myself on it, that I like to believe that I'm always a person that can be open and honest, but also very much trustworthy. Meaning that if somebody comes to me and asks me if they speak to me in confidence, it will stay with me until my grave. And so, I think there's something about that. I think there's the way we interact with people and the relationships that we establish to know that you can be trusted, know that you foster a warm and positive environment, and that you're able to, be you, and make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes, but learning from those mistakes. I like to treat mistakes as an opportunity for growth, which I've certainly made many of in the last decade or 15, 20, all of my life.
Thanks, Adam. So this question, it's kind of twofold. It may sound familiar from your tour actor days, your tour actor interview. What excites you about the job, the executive director position, and what scares you about the job?
And before you go, Adam, I'm probably the last question that I would ask is, what questions do you have for us? So I probably will end up leaving somewhere in the middle, and I'm sorry. It's just that I have got to get it's a whole full faculty meeting and it's a long story, but
I
no,
understand.
love
It was
to
nice to see you again, Laura.
love to see you. I'll listen for a while and then I'll have to leave. So Jonna, hopefully this recording will go to your computer. So, okay.
Well, I think the thing that excites me the most is really the answer to the first question I gave in the last interview, which is through a professional lens, I don't think too many things would please me more than to help be on a team, lead a company that has meant so much to me in my life for almost 30 years. I've kind of seen the organization through many different lenses as a camper, as a tour actor, as a pack camper, as a pack artistic music director. And so just to see the impact that it has on students' lives and in their world really, really makes me passionate about it. I grew up in rural Nebraska where performance opportunities were sporadic. And it wasn't until MCT entered my sphere that I knew that it was okay to be involved in the arts, that it wasn't taboo, that I felt a deep calling and a sense of belonging, as so many people do, with involvement in the arts, and specifically with the children's theater. I just think it has the potential to do so much good in the world. And so for me to be able to give back some of those opportunities and help work alongside some of the individuals that have gotten me this far would be an incredible honor and a deep privilege. So that's probably what excites me professionally. On a personal level, I think I've always had this deep secret in the back of my mind that I wanted to live in Missoula and raise a family in Missoula. My wife and I have talked at length about how awesome it would be to raise a family there. There's so much opportunity for our children, would be. By the way, there's Simon, I don't think you know, I have 2 twin boys. They're 2, and they're awesome, and they're full of life. And but I want for my children to have artistic opportunities and have outdoor opportunities and athletic opportunities, much more than I had growing up in a population of 1,700 growing up, in rural Nebraska. Which is not to diminish that experience. I had a great upbringing. But once you all live there, but once you live in Missoula, you just fall in love with it. I tell Joseph Martinez on the call every time I get off the plane for PAC, like he picks me up and rolls down his window. I say, I love that Montana smell, that Missoula smell. It has a smell, and it's great. And so I've always kind of had this deep I guess desire to live in Missoula, and more excited